The events that are to take place over the next 5 years will be a time period that future generations will talk about as the great shift into a new age. That, of course, is just my opinion. I suppose that nothing is more important than the present moment, so to give too much attention to future events is to fall out of balance within oneself. Yet there is a benefit that comes when we pull our gaze further down the road. It helps us gauge our strategy on how to drive the car in the most efficient and effective way possible. It's a balance between being appropriately prepared versus being paranoid over unlikely events that you probably don't have any control over anyhow. 2016 is proving to be one of the most paramount years ever in terms of the number of events that are clearly unfurling the curtain to the gaze of the public that the majority of global leaders, both political and financial, have been up to no good for quite some time. They've been playing out a Ponzi scheme at the expense of the global citizenry. They've told us that we have been operating under a system of democracy and free market capitalism, when in fact it's been a disguise for a small few to steal the abundance of this planet for themselves. The masterful part about the Ponzi scheme is that people who are participating in the system have no idea what's going on. Take, for example, Danish-born Mads Palsvig, a former investment banker for companies like Credit Suisse and Morgan Stanley. Mads joined me on an LSE podcast episode to talk about how he left his high-paying job full of future financial security once he realized money was being created out of thin air by central bankers. There are many who are finally waking up to the fact that the largest banks in the world are cooking the books at the expense of future generations, imprisoning them into the shackles of debt slavery. In the United States and most of the world, real wages haven't increased in over 3 decades, while the cost of living continues to increase at a rate that leaves people having no choice but to take on debt or make radical lifestyle changes. Without a doubt, people should learn to live with less anyway, but that's another story for another time. The debt that exists by all the countries in the world is more than all the money that exists by 2.5 times, which means it will never be paid off. The Federal Reserve can't lower the interest rate anymore without just coming out in the open and saying it's game over. The control that the central bankers have had over the majority of the countries on this globe is starting to fracture, as we can see with the BRICS nations, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, who are starting their own bank that won't be backed by the worthless paper dollar anymore. It's all unfolding right now before us, even though mainstream media won't give it hardly any attention. Time magazine recently ran a poll that 46% of American workers feel that they are underemployed for what their true potential should be. The unemployment numbers that the federal government is giving out are quite inaccurate because they don't take into account underemployed part-time workers who were once full-time employees and those who have been unemployed for more than 1 year. 1 in 7 Americans is on food stamps, and despite what the Republican propaganda of separation might say, not all of those people are just a bunch of lazy asses who want to suck off of the government tit while others do the heavy lifting for them. The days are numbered on a corrupt system that can't keep cooking the books without devaluing the very thing that props them up. All you have to do is do some homework, and you will realize that the foundation of this system is about to crumble. I'll leave you some suggestions in the notes below of people who explain this much better than I do. Whenever I post anything on Facebook having to do with strong evidence pointing towards this impending financial collapse, I get crickets chirping in terms of response from my friends and family. I'm no different than anyone else. I'd much rather focus on the beautiful things of this world than give my attention to something that is telling me my world could be turned upside down. In fact, it is my personal belief that the world won't change by focusing on what's wrong. It'll change when each person starts to focus on living joy-filled lives full of laughter, love, and connection. Yet with that said, we live in a world that is playing out a story that we don't really have direct influence over. The piper must eventually be paid, and there isn't one person who's going to stop the tide of a global system that is destined for destruction. Many people are aware of this and have a sixth sense that we are approaching this proverbial cliff. Our planet cannot sustain the environmental impact at the current rate of consumption under this current economic system. No one can say when the collapse will come because the central bankers are masters of illusion and they won't go quietly. They are so good at illusions that they've made the system so complicated with its derivatives and fractional reserve lending that most people don't even bother to try and understand it. It took a guy like Mads Palsvig a career spanning over 20 years to finally fully understand it. It's no wonder most don't know what to think by talk of an impending financial collapse. It scares most people to feel helpless about something they can't control. It triggers fears about our inability to take care of the physical needs of ourselves and our loved ones. Some are faced with losing everything they've spent a lifetime working for. Imagine working a lifetime in this current system only for it to all be washed away because of the actions of a small few and the ignorance of the many. When you combine that with a global culture that emphasizes a deep attachment to one's personal worth based on material wealth and possessions, it's no wonder a British medical journal study showed that suicide spiked by as much as 10% in the USA and Europe after the last economic crash in 2008. Only this time around in the perpetual boom-bust cycle, there will be no more bailouts. There will be no more kicking the can down the street for a future generation to deal with. The central bankers have run out of options beyond creating a world war that, if they succeeded in pulling off, would potentially end in nuclear devastation. It's no wonder no one wants to talk about this. The game has never been more real and the stakes have never been so high. Yet with all that said, there has never been a time in recorded history to have more optimism for the human species than now. People are waking up to a more heart-driven life rather than a life pre-prescribed and dictated by family, religious, and nationalistic cultures. In so doing, humanity is reconnecting and the truth is finally emerging from the brave few who have stood up against the many for the pursuit of integrity and a betterment of the human condition. Eventually, the few become the many and the many become the few. This impending economic collapse is partially being driven by those who are demanding a system of integrity. No one can say for sure how the collapse will look, but this is going to be humanity's best opportunity to create a new system that benefits all and not only a few, a system that rewards innovation, that supports sustainability over all else, leaving future generations on this planet for thousands of years to come. A world without war, a world that celebrates the individuality of every person and the beauty of the oneness that we all share. My hope is that each of us educates ourselves enough to make whatever preparations we need to make in order to keep our families not only surviving, but thriving. This is going to be our finest day yet. It will be a liberation from something that most of us didn't even know existed. There is an unrealized potential in all of us that is waiting to be unlocked. We have nothing to fear, though. It is the ultimate destiny of each member of this global family to play our part.